Okay, so we've made it to the point where the work gets serious. So everything we've done so far is basically just discussions around all of the basic principles that underline all pharmacology. Now we're actually going to be targeting a system. And you'll be doing systems throughout the rest of the year now. So all of the basic principles have now been taught. From now on, you're doing principal systems. So the first system we're going to delve into is the autonomic nervous system. So I think you guys probably did some of this now, but it refers to the parasympathetic system and the sympathetic system. Yeah, I have a little graph. Hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense then. Let me quickly show you a bit of the outcomes. What do I want to tell you here? So here you can see we're talking about mechanisms. We're talking about the treatment, and we're talking about a specific disease or a specific thing here. It's become much more specific, but all of the pharmacological things apply here. So when I talk about a mechanism, I'm actually talking about, is it an antagonist, is it an agonist, is it an enzyme inhibitor, how exactly does it do its work, how does it change something in a disease. And then parasympathetics, oh my word, that word is so difficult. This refers to drugs that kind of go against the parasympathetic system or counteract the parasympathetic system. So these kind of refer to antagonists. So you see, we've done antagonists, and now they come into the work in various places. And agonist, same story. So you have to understand those basic principles before you go forward, especially because it becomes so complicated memorizing these things without a thorough understanding on the first things. Extremely difficult. And to make matters worse, there's a bunch of names in here that you've never seen. And I will tell you which ones are the most important ones for you guys. But generally speaking, there are a lot of names, and you will definitely struggle to understand them. Okay, I think we'll basically explain all of this as we're going through the work. Let me just think if there's something specific I want to go into here. Not really. So before I even show you this, maybe I should, let me show you this first. So you guys do your anatomy, so you know the nervous system is complicated. It's huge, complicated. So we're not doing all of the nervous system, we're doing certain things within the nervous system. So for this module, for this section of the work, we're not touching all CNS kind of things. So there are certain central nervous system side effects that I would go into, but we're not really touching on CNS things. We are really touching on all of the peripheral things. So follow this flowchart. Nervous system, CNS, the big one, no, go that way. Peripheral nervous system. And then from the peripheral nervous system, we have one we can control, the somatic system. That's the one we control, voluntary control. And then we have the autonomous one, the autonomic nervous system. So we have no control over it. Even as I'm looking into this camera, the light here changes the way my pupils dilate and how they contract. Mydriasis, meiosis, it's changing the whole time. So all of those things I have no control over. It's all autonomic. So that's what we're going into. And then we know that your autonomic nervous system is really divided into two things: the sympathetic system and the parasympathetic system, or division. You can call it however you want. So sympathetic, think about action, think about running, think about getting away from a threat. Parasympathetic, think about preserving yourself, think about resting, think about getting energy into your body, so like digesting. Little bit more on that as we go through it. So we have a lot of drugs. So this section is about those two nervous systems and a bunch of drugs we have that can actually exert an effect on that system. We'll give you a lot of examples as we go through it. All the involuntary body functions, I've basically mentioned that just now. We have no control over it. There is a subdivision, the voluntary control. Yes, that's the somatic side. It's a network of nerve cells. Okay, so what you should also understand is that this autonomic nervous system communicates with each other. So the signal starts somewhere in your hypothalamus, and the signal travels downwards. So so that the control of this nervous system is happening from the brain somewhere. So somewhere in the hypothalamus there is an action that's being generated. And that action runs down to a certain organ, or maybe your eye here, maybe the iris radiator muscle here. Is it the iris radiator muscle? You see anatomy every time. Or maybe runs down to your saliva glands. And at that point between the nervous system and the organ, or the end cell, end effector site, you get the same receptors. So all the receptors we were talking about now we're starting to talk about specific receptors and specific drugs that will act on those receptors. Okay, let's give you a nice example here quickly. So the parasympathetic side, you have, okay, I think, I can't remember, thoracic, cervical, lumbar, and then, I can't remember what the S stands for, no idea. Anyways, this is basically how the nervous system runs from your CNS, so meaning on top here you've got your brain itself. So think about the autonomic nervous system, think about hypothalamus, and then hypothalamus runs out. So it starts from the CNS, but it runs out towards the rest of the body, so the periphery. So the action starts on top and runs downwards, and then you know how it's connected. It's connected. The nervous system is connected. A bunch of neurons that have formed long nerves, and then communication is action potentials that travel downwards until they reach the end site, or let's say the end organ, and then there is transfer of neurotransmitters at that point to convey a message, transfer a message, and get that organ to do something. So here you can see the parasympathetic has control over the eye, the lacrimal glands, meaning your mouth. Is it the lacrimal is your eye? Sorry. salivary glands, meaning your mouth. Your heart, your lungs, your upper gastrointestinal tract. Also, a lot of your lower gastrointestinal tract. So we'll get into that. There's your lower gastrointestinal tract. Okay, so it's just about the way it's connected. Anatomy and me once again. Sorry. It innervates your bladder and your genitalia. Preganglionic, postganglionic, so this is referring to these fibers here. So preganglionic, so basically what it means if I'm talking about this preganglionic, postganglionic, is, let's say this is the nerve. I've got such a nice example. Yeah, okay. This is the brain, this is your CNS, hypothalamus. Then it travels down your spine, and let's say this is this entire CNS, and this is traveling out of your spine here. This is the ganglion. So at the ganglion, there is a transfer from preganglionic to postganglionic. There's the connection. And then this could be, for example, the salivary gland, or it could be the heart, or it could be whatever. I just want you to understand that there's a ganglion in the autonomic nervous system. There's always a ganglion on both sides. So you've got a presynaptic ganglion, and you've got a postsynaptic ganglion. So this simply refers to this little site here where messages are being transferred. So the ganglion is important for one reason, is because we can act on it with certain drugs. That's why you need to understand a bit about it. So both sides, the sympathetic side and the parasympathetic side, starts at the CNS, travels down the preganglionic fiber, then this is the ganglion, and the ganglion is a transfer of message, and that message runs, goes to the end effector site. I hope that's making sense. So this is happening on both sides, and on both sides the ganglion has the same neurotransmitters conveying a message both sides. I hope that's making a little bit of sense. We'll go into that more detail a bit later. So this is a parasympathetic side, rest and digest side, and then you've got your sympathetic side. I can't exactly remember how my slides are set up. I don't want to confuse you guys too much between the two. Hopefully we do drugs in specific. I think I'll do the drugs in specific sections for you. And then your sympathetic side is basically, you can think about the sympathetic side as your fight or flight side. Whenever you get a big fright, whenever someone scares you, whenever you almost get in an accident, or when you got into an accident in a car, however, whenever there's serious stress involved, the sympathetic side is activated. And in the sympathetic side, you can see all the things that's innervated by it. So your eye, your blood vessels. Blood vessels is interesting. People who are stressed generally have high blood pressure, so that's because of this mechanism here. So one way or another, your sympathetic system exerts a certain amount of control onto your blood vessels, and that controls your blood pressure to a certain extent, while also in tandem with your heart. Salivary glands, lungs. When you get a big fright, do you need more air into your lungs or less? You want to run, you need air. Adrenal medulla to release a bunch of adrenaline all at once. You remember your adrenal medulla stores adrenaline. So once you have a very big fright, your hypothalamus will tell your adrenal medulla, release the adrenaline so we can get out of here, and then you run away. I think I will give you a nice example a bit later on. Liver, very complicated. It's all about energy synthesis. It's about glucogenesis and gluconeogenesis. No, glucogenolysis and gluconeogenesis. And that's all about releasing glucose from glucose stores within the liver, because glucose itself is energy. So your body would want more glucose in the bloodstream, so it actually has more energy to rely on when it's trying to run away from something. The bladder itself, because generally speaking, let's say you were in the wild and you were running away from a bear, you don't want to leave a trail of urine that the bear can use to follow you. Genitalia, not really going to go into it. There is a good reason for that. No, there's a lot of theory around it, but drug-wise, there's not really a lot of drugs that we use that can do anything to your genitalia from the autonomic nervous system side. So let's forget about it for now. Blood vessels, sweat glands, etc. There's a big list also coming up. I think there's also a nice one in your book. In your book, there's a nice list of all the places where you have receptors for the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic side and the parasympathetic side, and what those receptors are on both sides. So, at this point, what I want you to understand is that this is a nervous system that is in your body, in place, right now. It's been there, always been there. We simply found drugs that can affect these nervous systems here. And we know the nervous system communicates with each other via neurotransmitters and receptors. And we can mimic both those, or we can influence both of those. And that is the principle behind everything that I will be teaching you going forward now. I hope it's making sense so far. Okay, let's get back into it. I hope things are making sense so far. Next step. Alright, let's go to this little, what do you call it again? Seesaw. So you have two sides well, you've got two divisions. You have the two divisions. You've got the parasympathetic side and you've got the sympathetic side. The one side is rest and digest, and rest and digest is kind of opposite of fight or flight. Fight or flight meaning either you fight the threat or you run away from the threat. So there's a nice example of a snake. Of course, depends on who you are, doesn't it? if you were someone else, you'd maybe pick up the snake and just throw it away. Most of us would run. Can we agree? Most of us would run. Let's say it's not a normal snake. This is a very, very venomous snake, and it's a very aggressive snake, and he has wings. Then you would probably not want to fight it. You would run away. So let's say it's that kind of snake. And on the parasympathetic side, it refers to everything relaxy. So you either do one or the other. These two are what we call physiological antagonists of one another. So they are within the autonomic nervous system, but when subdivided, they work on two completely different nervous systems, because they are, in a sense, completely different nervous systems. They have got their own neurotransmitters and their own receptors, completely independent of one another. They don't interact with one another. So normally, when your parasympathetic system is activated, your adrenergic system or your sympathetic system would be, well, not activated or relaxed or deactivated. When your sympathetic system is activated, your parasympathetic system would be deactivated. So that's why it's on a seesaw here. So if I antagonize my parasympathetic system, my sympathetic system would be active. Try and memorize it that way. It makes all the drugs and understanding the drugs much easier. And same thing going for sympathetic system. If I activate my sympathetic system, you can automatically assume my parasympathetic system is being deactivated. So it's an all or nothing kind of a thing, left or right. Let's go through this slide together quickly. So in order to understand all of it, you have to understand how an action potential actually reaches that end effector organ. So we already spoke about the impulse, and the impulse is being conducted from the brain, the hypothalamus, downwards towards an effector site. So the action potential travel down a nerve. These cells activate each other, boom, 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 until we get to something called the ganglion. The ganglion I showed you here. This is the ganglion. So message starting here, message traveling down, message going to the ganglion. And then from the ganglion, there's a transfer happening there. So then we have the presynaptic ganglion and the postsynaptic ganglion. Presynaptic nerve fibers and postsynaptic nerve fibers. Something happens there, meaning there is a neurotransmitter being released there, and that neurotransmitter stimulates the postsynaptic nerve fibers to continue the message to where it needs to go. Message goes on, action potential. Okay, so the message goes on, going once again from that nerve. There's a ganglion transfers message is transferred, nerve is traveling to the effector organ, and at that effector organ, neurotransmitters are being released again. And that neurotransmitters being released there will depend on what side we're working on. Is it the sympathetic system or is the parasympathetic system? Because like I told you, these two are physiological antagonists of one another, so they have different receptor systems and different neurotransmitters. One exception, but I'll tell you the exception in a moment. Oh, that's the exception I want to tell you about. So it's about the ganglion. The ganglion is the only exception in the parasympathetic, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic system. So in the ganglion, they don't have different neurotransmitters there. They've got the same neurotransmitter there. Both of them, the adrenergic side and the parasympathetic adrenergic side, which is also called the sympathetic side, and the parasympathetic side, which is also called the cholinergic side. Both of those sides, both of their ganglions, have the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, or you guys will refer to it most likely as ACH in most of your tests, quizzes, etc. ACH. And ACH on the ganglion binds to the nicotinic receptors. So we have nicotinic receptors within our ganglions that transfers the message from the presynaptic ganglion nerve fibers to the postsynaptic ganglion nerve fibers. So that's once again here. So these are the ganglions here, and these are the ganglions here. So these ganglions from this presynaptic nerve fiber here, of the preganglionic nerve fiber here, we get acetylcholine released. Remember, action potentials travel downwards, action potential reaches the end point. At that end point, the end point is now the ganglion. You get acetylcholine being released once it's stimulated, once the action potential reaches that area. Acetylcholine is released there, and acetylcholine then binds to a nicotinic receptor. Once the nicotinic receptor is activated, stimulated, the message will travel forward. So, if I gave you a nicotinic receptor antagonist, I would actually block all of the effects the entire system has, or the entire autonomic nervous system could have, on the sympathetic side and the parasympathetic side, because there are nicotinic receptors in all of the ganglions on both sides. So it's not a very specific drug. We used to use it a lot, we don't use it that much anymore. Hopefully it'll make more sense as we go into specific details of each side. Okay, I think we are it's making sense. I hope it's making sense. Just another example here for you. So the sympathetic side and the parasympathetic side, like I told you, this could be also the adrenergic side, and this could also be the cholinergic side. This is the fight or flight side, and this is the rest and digest side. So central nervous system, hypothalamus. Hypothalamus message is generated here. Message travels downwards, the presynaptic ganglion. This is the ganglion itself, also called the autonomic ganglion. Acetylcholine is released once the message is gotten to that last little axon, the last little nerve cell. Message is released. Message is released as acetylcholine. Acetylcholine binds to nicotinic receptor. Nicotinic receptor is then activated because these neurotransmitters are agonists, so they bind and they stimulate. Once they stimulate this postsynaptic ganglion or this postsynaptic ganglion nerve fibers of these fibers, the message will once again continue downwards until it reaches the end organ, the target tissue, and there are receptors once again, and then the nerve fiber from the ganglion onwards is now specialized, meaning it's either sympathetic or parasympathetic. Sympathetic, then the nerve fiber will release norepinephrine, or for you guys, us South Africans or Americans, and noradrenaline. And adrenaline will bind to adrenergic receptors. We'll discuss those in a second. On the parasympathetic side, the postsynaptic ganglion, those nerve fibers, are the same as the ones on top. So the ones that you will be getting are releasing acetylcholine. Acetylcholine will be binding to muscarinic receptors. So acetylcholine, I've mentioned now a few times to you guys. Acetylcholine is the one that's used for muscle contractions in the somatic nervous system, so we can do something there. Acetylcholine is the one that actually relays the message in both sides of the nervous system, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic side, that tells the system to continue the impulse forward, and it's the one that is released on the to the target tissues of the parasympathetic system. And there we have muscarinic receptors, actually receiving the message and doing the work afterwards. Okay, let's quickly see where I want to go with this now. Okay, we've basically discussed the divisions of them both, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic side. Now I want you to a little bit more understand the parasympathetic side. And then there is a way of memorizing all of this or making sense of it, and I think I'll give you that little method. Hopefully it helps all of you. So I basically just mentioned all of this. So parasympathetic side, receptors on the parasympathetic side. Now we're at the receptor level within a certain system. Now is really where the memorization actually has to happen. So there is a lot of memorization you have to do. So in the parasympathetic system, we've got muscarinic receptors. These muscarinic receptors go from M1 to M5. For you, in this module, you will not memorize anything to do with M4, M5. You are stuck with M1, M2, M3. M1 is mostly in the central nervous system. So once again, you're not really doing anything central nervous system, so you can almost, in a certain sense, just forget about this for now. So the ones that you will mostly be dealing with are M2 and M3. M2 has to do with relaxing. So if M2 is agonized, stimulated, you'll get a relaxing effect. If M2 is antagonized, you'll get an activating effect. So if I give you a muscarinic 2 receptor agonist, your heart will beat slower. If I give you a muscarinic 2 receptor antagonist, your heart will beat faster. I can understand these things are difficult the first time. So the opposite happens. Well, just memorize it like that for now. I think I'll explain it maybe a bit better at the right time. The muscarinic 3 receptors are different. Once they are activated, they cause contraction or they cause activation. So when M2 is activated, you get almost a deactivated end effector. So for your heart, for example, let's say your heart was beating 100 beats per minute. M2 receptor is activated by acetylcholine. That relaxes your heart, so your heart's beating slower now. M3 is different. If M3 is stimulated, you will get more contraction happening, but M3 isn't in the heart, so we have smooth muscle here. So let's say it was your small intestine. Your small intestine was moving 100 milliliter of gastrointestinal fluid through per hour. Now, once I stimulate M3, that muscle will become more active. It will contract faster. So if I activate muscarinic 3 receptors, you will maybe end up digesting or moving through 200 mils of gastric fluid per hour. And if I antagonize muscarinic 3 receptors, you will end up maybe with 50 mils going through in an hour. So it will be slower. So muscarinic 3 receptors, activation. Muscarinic 2 receptors, deactivation. A lot of memorizing work for you guys. Pharmacology, a lot of memorizing work, a lot of understanding work, generally just speaking, much more difficult than you would have thought. So that covers the parasympathetic side. This is basically what you need to know receptor wise. There's a lot of interactions happening downwards, and we'll get to that. Small steps, baby steps. Now over to the adrenergic system. In the adrenergic system, the ganglions work the same. So there's no difference in the ganglions between the adrenergic system and the cholinergic system. And then I have to remember. I remember to tell you that as well. So in the adrenergic system, once the postsynaptic ganglion is activated and the nerve or the signal travels forward, you get noradrenaline being released. Don't forget about the norepinephrine thing. That's an American thing. Noradrenaline. Noradrenaline will be released to the effector site or to the effector organ or to the target tissue. And that noradrenaline will go and activate the adrenergic receptors. So the adrenergic receptors we refer to alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1, beta 2, and beta 3. Here's a few locations where you can actually find them. But don't memorize that now. We'll memorize it in a moment, or there's a way of memorizing it, you'll see. So that's noradrenaline. So in the nervous system itself, it's noradrenaline. But then, if you go back to this slide, you remember that we had this. We had a part of this the adrenal system, or the adrenergic system, going to the adrenal medulla. So once the adrenal medulla is activated, you actually get release of adrenaline itself into your bloodstream. So this adrenal medulla can release a massive amount of adrenaline itself into the bloodstream. And adrenaline itself is much, much, much more potent on these receptors than noradrenaline is. So it's something we call a neurohormone. So it's a neurotransmitter, but because it's being distributed in the blood, it's a hormone, so a neurohormone. Basically supercharges the entire adrenergic system. Intrinsic activity. So I've mentioned all of this before. So for something to be an agonist, it must have affinity, so it must bind to the receptor, and must have intrinsic activity, it must stimulate the receptor. So obviously noradrenaline and adrenaline both are agonists, meaning they have affinity and intrinsic activity for these receptors. Stimulation of presynaptic receptors inhibit noradrenaline release. So this, I think, will only make sense a bit later. Memorize it, and then remember there's a certain section where I'll explain it more in detail, but not something you can just quickly understand by reading it. It's more difficult. You need an explanation, and that explanation I'll give to you in a certain slide. Hopefully when I'm on the slide I'll remember. Otherwise, tell me in class to remember it. I think I will remember, don't worry. Small Yana break. Okay, so up until this point, this should all make sense. So I've kind of discussed all of this. The only thing I really didn't get into are these short and long fibers between these two different systems. Really, I didn't go into it is because it doesn't really make a difference drug-wise and how we use drugs, etc. So I'll just mention it once again. So parasympathetic, you've got long fibers, preganglionic, and you've got short fibers, postganglionic. I think your book is going to say the same thing as well. I don't know why it's said, but it's there. It's there. It's as if it's very important, but it doesn't really make a difference how the drugs work or anything, but it's there. Sympathetic, preganglionic short, postganglionic long. And then I've said it, I can just leave it one side and we won't go into that too much again. Probably won't be asked as a question as well. So you should remember that we have a sympathetic parasympathetic system. I hope that's all clear by now. And then you have a ganglion, and then the ganglion works with acetylcholine. Acetylcholine binds to nicotinic receptor to transfer a message forward. Acetylcholine is, in other words, an agonist on the nicotinic receptor. And then in the sympathetic side, you have the postganglionic fibers running towards the effector site, and the effector site would have either an alpha 1, alpha 2 receptor, or a kind of that's this side's true for now, and then you or it could have a beta 1, a beta 2, or a beta 3 receptor. Parasympathetic side, same mechanism, the ganglion, acetylcholine, nicotine stimulates, message goes on, and then postganglionic fibers run toward effector sites that have muscarinic receptors. And I told you, you worried about muscarinic 1, muscarinic 2, and muscarinic 3 receptors. You are not worried about muscarinic 4 and 5 receptors. They are centrally acting. You get to centrally acting drugs later on. Or you get to the CNS later on, and then you'll do more drugs there. And that's what I want to mention about that. So this is a very big mouthful. The general steps involved in synthesis, storage, and release of neurotransmitters, and the mechanisms of actions of drugs. So if you understand this here, the general steps involved in synthesis, storage, and release of neurotransmitters, you could easily imagine how drugs would work. So I'll go over this with words first, and then I'll have a little image that could make more sense with you. Okay, so there's how do you even do this without the image? Let me open the image for you. Where's my mouse? My mouse has disappeared. Wait, I got it. No, I lost it. There it is. Okay, got it. Let's open this image here. So that entire slide is revolving around this. So within this nerve terminal, and now, we can think about this as the ganglion. So this could be the ganglion itself here. So this is the presynaptic ganglion, this is the postsynaptic ganglion here. That's a receptor there, but the receptor, is coupled to a cell or a neuron. Or so if it's a ganglion, then we know it's a neuron. And then this neuron would maybe lead to it could maybe be the heart, or it could be the liver, etc. As long as you get the idea that at the moment we're in the ganglion, this is the presynaptic ganglion and this is the postsynaptic ganglion, and this nerve would lead to elsewhere. So this entire thing, this mouthful I just mentioned here, all refers to this process that's happening here. So, in the first case here, this nerve here, the preganglionic nerve, takes up some precursors, and these precursors are in a certain way made or synthesized into the actual neurotransmitter that will be released. So, synthesis of transmitter, uptake into the vesicles. These are the vesicles. And then I don't want you, this exact process we go into a little bit with you guys in PHA 204, but not too much. Then, where you really have to understand things well is that as soon as this neurotransmitter, this ready-made neurotransmitter, is in these vesicles, once there is a calcium influx, and when will you have a calcium influx? When there's an actual potential that reaches this area. So, message getting sent, sending down preganglionic fiber. So sending down a preganglionic fiber, reaches the ganglion. The ganglion, we're basically referring to this last nerve there, the nerve terminal. Once the actual potential reaches there, there's a calcium influx, and that calcium influx would cause these neurotransmitters stored in these vesicles to be released. Neurotransmitters are released, and then they diffuse through the fluid in this area. So they are diffusing into this area here. Released neurotransmitter, diffusion, yes. And then this neurotransmitter would bind to a receptor. Then you would get an action, because this neurotransmitters are agonists, remember. So if this is a presynaptic ganglion, or the ganglion, once again this is the ganglion, my example, that would be a nicotinic receptor there. And once it's bound to this, the message will continue going to wherever the ganglion was intending to go. Then we get something called the inactivation of a neurotransmitter. So this will differ for a bunch of places in the body, but for the cholinergic system, or for any system that contains acetylcholine, we have an enzyme called acetylcholine esterase. So it's an enzyme that destroys acetylcholine and then takes it so it can be reabsorbed as a precursor again. The exact steps involved in that, not so important. What you need to understand is that there is an enzyme here that can inactivate this neurotransmitter. So once all of them have bound and there's still excess neurotransmitter left here, it becomes deactivated by acetylcholine esterase. And this is in the ganglions. Remember, if I'm talking about the adrenergic nerves that are working with noradrenaline, there's different enzymes there. So, deactivated, and then it goes back here and it's synthesized again over and over. Then, in some nerves, you get a presynaptic receptor. So, a receptor on the nerve terminal here, presynaptic, preganglionic. This receptor here, once stimulated, would actually cause a outflow or a hyperpolarization of this cell. So, if this cell is hyperpolarized, the transmission of the neurotransmitters stored in the vesicles won't be released anymore. And what I'm talking about here refers to this stimulation of a presynaptic receptor. So, this is really important with the adrenergic system. So, in the adrenergic system, you've got alpha 2 receptors on the presynaptic nerve. Once those alpha 2 receptors are stimulated, they stop more neurotransmitter from being released. If more neurotransmitter is not being released, will the effect continue or will the effect stop? Most likely stop. So, I think I've discussed this image in enough detail, I hope. What's 12? Doesn't really matter. Let's go over these questions and hopefully it can make more sense again. So, uptake of precursor for synthesis. So you have to understand that there's something taken up within that presynaptic cleft that makes the neurotransmitter. That neurotransmitter could be acetylcholine or it could be noradrenaline. Then you have to know that it's being made in enzymatic synthesis, and then you have to know it's stored in vesicles. Then you know these vesicles with the neurotransmitter will only be released when calcium influxes into that nerve terminal. And that will only happen when the action potential reaches that area. And then you get the neurotransmitter released. The neurotransmitter will go and bind to certain receptors, postsynaptic receptors, and that could be on the effector, it could be on whatever. On the ganglion, it's on the postganglionic nerves. And then you get termination of the action. So termination of the action refers to that enzyme in that synaptic cleft, the synaptic cleft between the preganglionic or the presynaptic and postsynaptic nerves. Remember the communication place here. There's an enzyme in there that goes and destroys those neurotransmitters for recycling. And then you get reabsorption and restorage into storage vesicles again. I've got a throat in my... No, not a throat. I've got a frog in my throat. Anyways, I hope this is making sense. It should be making sense. If it's not making sense, review it 15 more times. We're getting to drugs now. Now it becomes even worse. But before we get to drugs, there is a little thing that I want to show you first. Hopefully it helps you memorize some of this work. Okay, so let's just quickly stop here. Okay, so we have a little exercise we're going to do now. But first, just to clarify once again this. So we already discussed that M1 gives you activation, M2 gives you deactivation, M3 gives you activation when it's an agonized with a neurotransmitter, or when a neurotransmitter binds to it. So if I give you an agonist on M2, I would actually cause deactivation. So the heart wouldn't activate and beat faster, it would beat slower. If I give you an antagonist on M2, I would cause the heart to beat faster because I'm blocking the effect that the agonist would have had. Okay, so general rule of thumb. Anything over 2 gives you deactivation. Anything over 1 or a 3 gives you activation. So on that basis, over 1 gives you activation, constriction, contraction, stimulation. 2 gives you stimulation, but I mean with a deactivating effect, so relaxation, muscles not contracting, relaxing. Beta 1, activation. Beta 2, deactivation, relaxing. Kind of. There's a little bit of memorizing work there. And beta 3 gives you don't actually have to worry about beta 3. It's there, but don't worry about beta 3. For you guys, 1 and 2, alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1, beta 2. Don't worry about beta 3. Okay. Knowing that, I want you to memorize to a certain degree what all effects would happen in the body upon the effect of the adrenergic system or upon effect of the cholinergic system or the parasympathetic system. So I devised the plan, this little system here. So we've got the sympathetic system and we've got the parasympathetic system, and I have my little brush. Is my brush work? My brush is working. Okay. So let's create a scenario. We can use that snake scenario of earlier. Remember, we said it's not a normal snake. We're saying this snake in here, it's not going to be a normal snake. It's going to be a, let's call it, what was that thing in Harry Potter, that very scary snake? Let's say it's that snake. Or we say it's a snake with wings and very, very long fangs. Like that snake. No. Anyways, you're going to run away from this snake. End of story. No fighting the snake, running away. So, if you want to run away from the snake, what needs to happen? So, you have these radial muscles in your eyes, these pupil radial muscles. Do you think they should relax? Remember, if they contract, they open up your eye. So, do you think they need to contract and open up your eye, or do you think they need to close down? The reason I'm saying this is, most of the time when you hear something, you get arthritis at night. So biologically it means our bodies could have evolved to run away. And if your pupils dilate, do you think you can see more or less? You want to see more. So you want to be able to see at night where you're running. So you want more light to come into your eye. So we want these pupils to dilate. So the pupils to dilate have alpha 1 receptors on them. The pupil dilated muscles, alpha 1 receptors. What about the ciliary body on the inside of the eye? So I'm not sure if you guys have actually done the ciliary body, but we have these muscles that that contract and they cause the lens to open up, or so if there's contraction happening inside of the eye, they pull against the lens sides and the lens becomes more flat. If the lens is flat, you can see very, very, very far. Hold on. I'm actually doing it the wrong way around here. Let me just double check this and get back to you. 2 seconds. Okay, so it happens to all of us. So I hope you can see, well, that's the inside of the eye, or everything about the eye that we want to discuss now. It's probably much more complicated than that. So when your lens is more convex, your focus is more narrow. Remember, if your lens is more convex, not convex, if your lens is flat, your focus is more broad, so you can see further. If the lens becomes more convex, the light will break closer and you'll be able to focus closer. So, do you want a flat lens when you're running away, or do you want a convex lens when you're running away? Do you want to see close, or do you want to see far? You're running away from that magical snake. So, my mind is, you want to see far. So, do you want the lens to become flat? Yes. How does your body do it? We've got these ciliary muscles. So, there you can see that ciliary muscle. Now there, that ciliary muscle. When the ciliary muscle relaxes, they actually go backwards. And when they move backwards, this lens becomes flatter. If the lens is flatter, the light breaks further away, meaning that you can see further. So, what receptor in the adrenergic system gives us relaxation? Okay, 2 seconds of thought. Anything over 2. So, we have a beta 2 there. The alpha 2 is very specific. The alpha 2 only comes in certain places, and I'll discuss that a bit later. But for now, beta 2. So, we want contraction to happen in this thing called the constrictor muscle. So we can get the dilator muscle, the pupil dilator muscle, so we can get our eyes to open up, our pupils to open up, so we can get more light into them. And we want our lens to become flatter, so we can see further, so we can run away. So our beta 2, there must be a beta 2 there to cause those ciliary muscles to relax, so the lens becomes more flat, so we can see further. Okay, so I hope it's making sense so far. Do we want more salivation or less salivation? Do we want to drool as we're running away from the snake, or do we want to, what do we want to do? I'm just double checking quickly here what is inside here. So yes and no. So there is some beta and alpha here, but it's not really a big deal. So I think for the sympathetic side, forget about this. Generally speaking, do you want to drool a lot when you're running away? No. So do you think there needs to be beta and alpha receptors in the salivatory glands? Let's say no. Okay. Memorize it that way. It will help you to understand all of it much more, better, just better. Okay. You're running away. Do you want more air to enter your lungs or less air to enter your lungs? So I'm basing this principle around your bronchioles. Remember your bronchioles inside your lungs. You've got all of these small bronchioles running around there. And these bronchioles contain muscles around them. So do you want these muscles around your bronchioles to contract, or do you want them to relax? Relax. So how do you get them to relax? Remember, adrenaline is going everywhere. You remember that we have this, there's not in this slide here. I told you about the adrenal medulla, and when we get a huge fright, the adrenal medulla releases a lot of the neurohormone adrenaline, and adrenaline goes everywhere. Remember, it's going into the bloodstream. Like I told you, from the bloodstream it can distribute everywhere. So now it's distributing everywhere. So what do you think needs to happen to your lungs when adrenaline gets there? Do you think the lungs the bronchioles need to constrict, or they need to relax? Relax. The bronchioles relax. Try blowing through a thin tube. I can't open this thing 2 seconds now. But when you're drinking a milkshake, do you want to drink a milkshake through a very thin straw or through a very thick straw? Probably through a thick straw. If the tube itself is thicker, you can get more air in. Do you want more air? Yes. Remember, this snake has wings. Like, you want to run away from this magical snake as fast as you can. Well, when you're running, what do you want your heart to do? Do you want your heart to just supply enough blood, or do you want to make sure your heart pumps more than enough blood? Probably more than enough. So we've got beta 1 receptors in our lungs. Our heart. So when beta 1 is stimulated, we get a bunch of effects. We get the rate increasing, we get the force increasing, and we get the automaticity increasing. So all of the things of the heart are enhanced. So the heart is beating faster and harder, and more blood will be pumped. So the cardiac output will increase, and you get more blood everywhere you want more blood to go. What about the gastrointestinal tract? I mean, so let's combine these two. Let's combine them quickly. What should happen in your gastrointestinal tract? Do you have energy? I mean, let's say you just had the most delicious McDonald's meal of your life before you saw this snake. Do you want this McDonald's shake to be digested now, or McDonald's meal to be digested now, or do you want it to be digested later? Do you want to save this food, or do you want to excrete this food very fast? You probably want to save this food for later, because after all of this running, you're going to be very tired. So your body has ingenious ways of doing this. So we have alpha-1 receptors on all the sphincters all along. Remember, there's a bunch of sphincters in your system here. So even here, now let me just quickly see if I can undo this. Even here, this is the pyloric sphincter here. Do you want this pyloric sphincter to let food through? Do you want to digest the food now, or do you want to first save yourself and the food and digest it later? You want to save it. So this pyloric sphincter here will probably have something like an alpha-1 receptor. So it can't actually open under the effect of the adrenaline, so it closes and digestion doesn't take place now. Digestion is a waste of energy at this moment. You want to save all the energy you can because you're running away from a magical snake. And what about all the muscles, the longitudinal muscles and the circulatory muscles in your gastrointestinal tract? Do you think they need to activate now and move the food through? No, you want them to relax. What receptor lets things relax in the adrenergic system? Beta 2 does that. Is it making sense how we kind of see what to put where? I'm not sure if I want to go into all of the things the liver does. So, but generally speaking, let me just double check myself again. Beta 2, alpha 1. Let's cut out the liver. I don't want you guys to go into the liver too much. It's about the body releasing more glucose into the bloodstream. So, there are some drugs that kind of do that, but it's not really something I want you guys to into. It's a bit more complicated, so it's not really something I want you guys to get into for now. Okay, the kidneys itself, I can't remember it's not the kidneys, it's the adrenal medulla. Remember, the adrenal medulla is on top of the kidney there. So, secretion of epinephrine. Okay, but we're past that now. What about your bladder? Do you want to make a trail between yourself and the snake that it can, well, can snakes smell? I don't think they can smell. They probably, it does that tongue thing. Do you want it to use the tongue to touch the air until it knows where you went because it has a urine path to follow? Probably not. So what receptor do you think you want around your detrusor? Remember, there's a muscle around your detrusor. When the detrusor contracts, you'll pee. So do you want the detrusor to contract now? Probably not. So beta 2 receptor. What about the sphincter here at the bottom? Do you want it to contract? Yes, you want to save the pee because you don't want to mark your pathway for the snake. Okay. So do you see all the things that you would want to happen and what receptors you can expect in those things? Kind of makes sense. Just on a side note, most of the beta 3 receptors are actually found in your fat cells or in your adipose tissue. So whenever your adipose tissue, the beta 3 receptor is stimulated there, it actually releases a bunch of energy in a various ways. So on the effect of adrenaline, you actually will break down a lot of fat. And that's one of the mechanisms behind a lot of fat loss drugs, but we don't have to get into that. Too complicated, don't have to get into that. Is it making sense what your body is wanting to do when you want to run away from a very vicious snake? Okay, so let's say you did successfully get away because this receptor system worked and you could run much faster. Oh, 2 seconds, I've got a knock. I see there's one thing I forgot to mention here. Okay, so this is the running away part, and one thing I didn't see here is about the blood flow itself. It's probably because it's not on this one here. Let's see if I can. Okay, we're gonna have to imagine here. Let's make a muscle. This is a big calf muscle, and this is a big quad muscle. Well, quadricep, that's a hammy there, and it's a quadricep. You know, the quadricep has these muscles there, and your hammy muscles there. It looks like a person, and you've got the calf muscles here. Okay, and there's a foot. Please don't argue. That's a beautiful leg. What I want to show you here now is it's about the blood flow. So we've covered everything, but I don't see it here. That's probably why I skipped it. But you remember your heart's beating faster. So do you want your blood, where do you want your blood to go? Remember, you're running away. So do you want the blood to go to your gastrointestinal tract that's at the moment standing still? Remember, we're inhibiting all of these muscles in the gastrointestinal tract. So do we need blood flow going there? Let's just make a heart, and then we make a circulatory system. And there and back. Oh wait, I've got a good idea. Hold on. Okay, there, and then there, and then back. Okay, so this is kind of arbitrary, but I hope the idea will be making sense. That's going to the gastrointestinal tract, and that one as well. Okay, so remember, your heart's beating faster, so your cardiac output is through the roof. You're running away from the snake. Do you want more blood to go to your gastrointestinal tract? Remember, it's not working at the moment. You don't actually have any absorption, or you don't want to really have absorption now. You want to first save yourself. So the answer is no. So we have alpha-1 receptors on the muscles around these arteries. Remember, the arteries toward your gastrointestinal tract, the arteries around the system of the body are kind of different, but the arteries towards your gastrointestinal tract have muscles around them as well. These smooth muscles we want to contract now, because we want the amount of blood going there to lessen. Because if we can lessen that, then the amount of blood going to the muscle can be increased. How? Because we have beta-2 receptors on those ones. Beta-2 receptors give you deactivation or dilation, so we have more blood going to the muscles. So now we're getting more blood to the muscles and less to the gastrointestinal tract. And even the skin. Have you seen when a person gets a very big fright, they seem very pale? It's because the blood flow, it kind of gives you a lot of your color. Blood flow decreases to that area. The blood flow decreases to that area, you can see more pale. So you can get like a fright where a person seems much paler. The reason is the alpha-1 receptors have caused the blood flow to this area to decrease. That blood flow decreases to that area, become more pale. And as that's happening, at the same time, the blood flow to your muscles will be increasing. Because beta-2 receptors on the arteries towards the muscles, these calf muscles and these quadriceps muscles will increase. So you get beta-2 receptors activated, you get dilation of those arteries, and these muscles get more blood. And you can run further, and you can get away. Okay, so everything I discussed now was about getting away from that snake, the magical snake. Now, after you've gotten away, your body needs to recover. Let me just double check if there is something else that I need to mention here. Kind of, but not really. I think the basic things for understanding I've kind of mentioned here. I don't think the other ones I want to mention now. Okay. The next step is what you want to do when you relax. But I think I'm going to change this because I can put the what do you call it, the video this side. 2 seconds. Okay. So we've run away from the magical snake, and we got enough blood into our muscles and not enough blood to elsewhere, so we could get away. Now, what must our body do after we've gotten away from that snake? So, you've run away from the snake, you are now in your safe habitat again, and you want to, let's say your safe habitat is just your house, you got into your house again. Do you want to see far or do you want to see near? So, most likely answer is near. So, what needs to happen to all of those muscles in your eye again? So you've got the iris, well, the contractor muscle as well. So this side you had the radiator muscle, the dilator muscle, which actually causes mydriasis on the sympathetic side. In the parasympathetic side, you've got a constrictor muscle that contains muscarinic-free receptors. And you want the muscarinic-free receptors to become activated. So when you're relaxing, you want to see close. So you want your eyes to, you want your pupils to constrict. We call it meiosis as well, and you want to be able to focus close to you, because I want to pick this up and I want to read this. If I had dilation happening, I wouldn't be able to read this, I wouldn't be able to focus close by, but I want to see this now. Making sense, I hope. That's the first thing. The muscarinic system has, or the cholinergic system has no effect on that ciliary muscle we spoke about earlier. There's no receptors there. What about salivation. So you were running around, you breathe a lot of air, and your mouth's now very dry. Do you want more salivation or less salivation? Remember, another word for the parasympathetic nervous system was also the rest and digest system. Rest plus digest. So do you want salivation to happen when you're digesting? Probably yes. So what receptor do you think you have in your salivary glands? Let me just quickly find them here. Muscarinic free receptors as well. Muscarinic free receptor. So here's a complicated one. What about your airways? Do you want your airways to actually become narrow when you're relaxing, or do you want them to still be big? So probably there's a reason for narrow. You also have, just outside of the muscles, those bronchial muscles there, the muscles around the bronchi, you actually have little mucus glands all around these areas. So remember, as you were running away from that snake, you might have been running past the construction site and you breathed in a lot of cement. So a lot of particles, cement particles, got stuck in your bronchia. So these glands you want activated so they can produce mucus. And as this mucus is being produced, it actually picks up those particles you inhaled, and via the little ciliary epithelial cells, this mucus is moved up until you can eventually swallow it. So to clear the lungs of particles that you inhaled, you want these bronchioles to constrict, and you want those glands to produce more mucus. So you have M3 receptors on your bronchi plus M3 receptors on your bronchial. I'm not sure what the right name for them actually is. What's the right name? Smooth muscle glands. So just glands. You want muscarinic free receptors there as well, so you can increase the secretions. So remember, M3 activation increasing. Salivary glands have M3 receptors, meaning activation, more saliva. The constriction muscles, also called the constrictor muscle inside the eye. I don't know if it's actually called that. The book says that. It doesn't sound right to me. You see, a pharmacologist also made this book. So you want constriction to happen so you can focus on close by things, so you can read close things. What about your heart? You're relaxing now. Do you want your heart to be beating like crazy? Probably not. So you've got M2 receptors there. Remember, M2 gives you deactivation, so your heart will be slower. Now, rest and digest. What do you want your gastrointestinal tract to do? You probably want it to now digest things. So what about this pyloric sphincter here? You want the food to start moving through. Remember, you ate that big McDonald's meal before you started running. And now you've survived, but now your body needs energy because it lost so much energy with the running. So what do you want your stomach to do, or your gastrointestinal tract? You probably want these, what do you call this thing again? A sphincter to relax. So you want like a muscarinic 2 receptor there. Muscarinic 2 receptors cause relaxation, remember. And then what about all of the muscles around your gastrointestinal tract? Do you want them to contract and move the food through to the areas where they can be absorbed, or do you want them to relax? You probably want them to contract. So you probably need something like a muscarinic free receptor around them to contract and move food through the system so you can actually absorb it somewhere there. And that was just for fun. So remember, no, let's not say it that way. What about your bladder? When you're resting, would it be easier to go to the loo? Probably yes. So you've got M2 receptors in your bladder sphincter, and you've got M3 receptors in your detrusor muscle, so you can go to the toilet when you're relaxed. This also actually fits here. I just want to explain it on a different section. So your bladder, when you are very stressed, when you're going for an oral, you generally start getting the urge to urinate, but you also struggle to go and urinate when you are very stressed. So just before, or when you're in class, for example, you could have a huge urge to urinate, but you feel too shy to stand up and go because you're starting to stress about that. And as you're stressing, you are actually stimulating the beta-2 receptors and the alpha-1 receptor, causing this bladder muscle to relax. And then as soon as you get home and you're relaxed, you go urinate immediately. The reason why I'm mentioning this is just to kind of display to you how stress can inhibit that from happening, and how relaxation can promote that from that happening. Another reason, why do you think you tend to get the urge to urinate more when you are stressed? Any ideas? It's because you have increased cardiac output. So if your cardiac output is increased, it means that you have more blood flowing through your kidneys, and your kidneys filter out more fluid faster, and you start making urine, or not making urine, but you start making urine faster. And then your bladder actually dilates faster, of course, until the point we actually need to go urinate. I hope all of this is making sense. A lot of places do not actually have, or a lot of places within, so places where you would get beta 1 and beta 1, 2, alpha 1 and 2 receptors, you do not necessarily get the muscarinic receptors. So some places yes, some places no. So like the sphincters, yes. The gastrointestinal tract, yes. The heart, yes. But something like the arteries, remember how we spoke about the arteries this side? The arteries, no. There's no cholinergic receptors around the arteries. Only adrenergic receptors are around the arteries, and mostly alpha 1 and beta 2. And the beta 2 is only towards the muscles, because you only need the muscles to run away. You don't want your blood to go elsewhere while you're running away. You want blood to your muscles, nowhere else. And then I think I've covered the most important things, and I hope that now it makes a little bit more sense where you get what. So all of these things are in the body. We know it's there now, and now we can design an agonist or antagonist, and we can get a certain effect. And that's the basis of all pharmacology. We know what receptor is there, we know how to target it, or we want to target it, and we find out how to target it. And that's it. Let's take a short break, and then we can go back to it again. Okay, so we have about 20 minutes left. Let's see how many things we can still put into this video in 20 minutes time. So I hope you guys understand so far how things are spread throughout the nervous system, or throughout both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. Now I want to go into the drugs themselves. So finally, so up until this point, we've just been discussing the nervous systems. So you should know what effect a neurotransmitter has on beta 1, beta 2, and more or less where they are. Not perfectly yet. I think it's a lot of memorizing work, and it's also part of your textbooks, etc. It's a lot of memorizing work, what receptor is where, and what you can expect when they are stimulated or when they are antagonized, or etc. So now we're going to talk about drugs acting on the sympathetic system. So sympathetic system, another word again, is adrenergic system. So your fight or flight system. So I think I've said it enough today. So when we talk about sympathomimetics, we are talking about drugs that mimic the effects of the sympathetic system. So drugs that mimic the effect of adrenaline or stress in brackets. When we're talking about sympatholytics, we are talking about drugs that antagonize the effects of the sympathetic system. Same thing goes for the parasympathetic system. If you talk about parasympathomimetics, we are talking about drugs that mimic the effect of the parasympathetic system. And when we are talking about parasympatholytics, we are talking about drugs that basically stop the effects the parasympathetic system would have had under normal circumstances. Okay, but now we are on the sympathetic system. We are on mimetics and lytics of the sympathetic system. So yeah, the antagonists and agonists come in, but it's even worse. It's more complicated. That's not that bad, don't worry. The mechanisms of sympathomimetics can be divided into two groups. So on the one side, we have things that act directly on the receptors. So these are our direct acting sympathomimetics. So these are, in other words, drugs that act directly on alpha and beta receptors. It could be alpha and beta, or it could be alpha specifically, or it could be beta specifically. And then when they act on these specific receptors, they cause the specific effects that you would get from those specific receptors. Indirectly, we have a few examples. One of the prominent ones is the pseudoephedrine, for example. That's the ones that cause the release of a neurotransmitter. So they don't act on the receptor themselves. They're not direct. They are indirect by causing the release of a neurotransmitter that would cause that effect under normal circumstances, or they can inhibit the breakdown of that neurotransmitter, thereby giving the effect. And I'm going to sneeze. Let me just quickly pause the video before I sneeze successful. Okay. So I hope it's making sense. If you're talking about direct, we're talking about a drug that acts as an agonist on a certain receptor. If you're talking about indirect, we're talking about a drug that would cause the normal neurotransmitter. So, for example, noradrenaline to be released under under different circumstances. Ooh, I'm saying it so wrong. Let's go to this slide here. So in this slide, let's say this is at the heart. So this is a beta 1 receptor here. And we know that the normal circumstances, as the noradrenaline released from this nerve terminal would actually bind to beta 1 receptors and give your heart more, well, let your heart contract more faster and harder. So I can give you a drug that acts directly there. So a drug that binds to this beta 1 receptor and causes the effect. Example is dobutamine. Or I can give you a drug that would force the normal neurotransmitters over here to be released more, so thereby indirectly enhancing the effect, or indirectly causing the effect, because basically the effect is still caused by the normal neurotransmitter, but we are forcing the neurotransmitter to be released more. So a drug like pseudoephedrine or ephedrine, they can act on those receptor stores. I can't remember what exactly. We spoke about it earlier. Hopefully we'll get back into it again. But some drugs can cause the neurotransmitters to be released, thereby indirectly activating that receptor. Some drugs can cause your neurotransmitters to be released. I think I said it the right way just now. Okay. I hope that's making some sense to you guys now. Let's go into the directly acting ones first. And, well, indirectly acting alpha agonists. So we have alpha 1, alpha 2, I think you guys you're fine with that now. And generally speaking, where did we find that alpha 1 receptor? Do I still have my image that I deleted? No, I still have my image. Where did we find the alpha 1 receptor? There was only really one place. It was really around the arteries, and the arteries going most places. Only the arteries going to the muscles had beta 2 receptors on them. But the arteries going most places have alpha 1. So you can in a sense say that most of your arteries have alpha 1 receptors on them. So if the alpha 1 receptor is agonized by an agonist, you will get extreme vasoconstriction. So if you have vasoconstriction all over your body, your blood pressure would rise. It's like taking you and squeezing you. If you squeeze you, your pressure would go up. And you get mydriasis. So it's also used in a lot of ocular surgeries, not surgeries per se, but inspections. So you give a person a droplet of something containing an alpha 1 agonist, like xylometazoline. I've got an example here for you all just discuss now. And then you actually cause that dilated muscle to activate, contract, and then it opens up the pupil. And then you can get entry into the eye and you can see what you're actually doing. So that's something that people would use. Oh, there was another example. Remember the bupivacaine and adrenaline one we spoke about? So adrenaline is a non-specific agonist, meaning it acts on a few places. So if you inject adrenaline into the gums, then you would get alpha 1 activation there. And alpha 1 activation means the blood flow is decreased, the blood can't flow away from the area, and you also don't have so much blood when you're working on the gums there. Another example is this one here, xylometazoline. It's a lot of the anti-congestion or even anti-congestion medications work on the same principle. So this one we have here is xylometazoline, but you have a lot of metazolines, oxymetazoline, xylometazoline, nafazoline, etc. All of them contain a alpha 1 receptor antagonist, meaning these arteries in my nose, if I spray this into my nose, it will go and bind to those little arteries, those little alpha 1 receptors on those arteries, and would force them to contract. If those arteries in my nose are contracting more powerfully, there's less plasma leakage happening from those arteries into my nose, so my congestion decreases. Okay, making sense, I hope. Oh, and then alpha 2 is only presynaptically. Remember, if alpha 2 is stimulated here, the neurotransmitters here won't be released. So alpha 2, how many alpha 2 agonists do we have? I think the only one I can think about is clonidine. So it prevents more neurotransmitters from being released. Not really widely used anymore, but we'll discuss that when we get there, if we even get there, if we even do it in this module. I'm not even sure if we do it in this module. Affected organs, reaction. Okay, we already discussed that. I think it's making sense. So that alpha 2 mechanism, if there was all of these alpha 1 receptors here, let's say this is the nerve terminal at a artery, and this is the artery smooth muscle. If all of the receptors on that artery smooth muscle were bound with an agonist or with a neurotransmitter like noradrenaline, then the remaining noradrenaline here would bind to the alpha-2 receptors and prevent more from being released, thereby preventing extended effect. So it's a natural mechanism your body has in place. Indirect acting, so we can cause more to be released, or we can prevent the reuptake or breakdown of noradrenaline. So remember, the alpha-1 receptors stimulated by noradrenaline. So we can directly act on those receptors, introducing a drug that acts like a neurotransmitter, that is an agonist, or we can force them to be released, or we can inhibit the breakdown of that adrenaline. So we have a few drugs. I'm not sure if we actually do them here in this section of the work, but I know they come in later for you guys. COMT inhibitors, let's do the other one. MAOI inhibitors, or MAO inhibitors, monoamine oxidase inhibitors. So monoamines would actually break down noradrenaline. So if you inhibit that enzyme from breaking down noradrenaline in this space, and the noradrenaline here isn't broken down, more noradrenaline becomes available. So that's also indirectly acting one. And I think those are examples. The names itself is in the book. I didn't actually put names of drugs in the slides, if I can remember correctly. Let's see. I'll definitely have a video for you guys on the names itself. Okay. Anyways, therapeutic uses for the alpha-1 agonists, so those are the direct acting ones, is anaphylaxis. So if a person has anaphylactic shock, when a bee stung a person, there's a lot of histamine being released, and histamine actually causes vasodilation, so blood pressure drops very fast. So if we want the person's blood pressure to shoot up to a mean arterial pressure of at least 60, so we can just survive, we give them adrenaline. Adrenaline is a very powerful alpha-1 agonist, meaning the contraction happens, and as the contraction happens, there's once again enough blood pressure, or enough pressure within the arteries to actually cause tissue oxygenation. Otherwise, a person would die of anaphylaxis. Adrenaline is the drug of choice, like I mentioned. Vasoconstriction, systolic diastolic pressure, bronchodilation. Oh yes, of course, the most important one is the salbutamol. Salbutamol is a beta-2 receptor agonist, meaning it stimulates the beta-2 receptors in the lungs. So you know, inhalers, asthma inhalers. When you use an asthma inhaler, you stimulate the beta-2 receptors in the lungs, and your bronchioles relax. When your bronchioles relax, you get more air in. So when your person has an asthma attack, you reverse it. And because it's specific, it only acts on beta-2, we don't actually get too many side effects. But if you use a lot of it the whole time, some of the salbutamol can actually cross-stimulate beta-1 receptors and give you some heart palpitations or some tachycardia. Making sense so far, I hope, for you guys. We spoke about this too many times already. Prolonging the effects of local anesthetics, adrenaline, I've spoken about this. So you can use it for superficial hemorrhage as well. You can reduce the amount of superficial or blood loss from a superficial cut, etc. Cardiac arrest, adrenaline is used to treat cardiac arrest as part of cardiac. Is it really? So let's rather put this in a different scenario. Sometimes when a person is critically ill, they need to go on vasopressor support. And vasopressor support means that they need something to keep their blood pressure high enough. So they need something to stimulate the heart to still pump powerfully enough, and they need something to increase the arteries contractions so they have enough blood pressure to have tissue oxygenation. So for those people, we give them something like tiobutamine or adrenaline the whole time, just to keep the blood pressure at the right level so they can just stay alive. So vasopressor support. Cardiac arrest, not so much. Nasal congestion and colds, well, that's me now. You can hear me sniffing and sniffling, yeah? And I'm at the moment using xylometazoline, yeah? And here is xylometazoline for you. So it's about that plasma leakage I just told you about. Here's a few other examples. Phenylephrine is alpha-1 and alpha-2 agonist, and that's the one you get in Corenza. Oxymetazoline you get in some other things, but these two, for example, are mostly in local preparations. So remember, we spoke about the topical preparations. This is an example of a topically applied drug or topically administered drug. Another thing I wanted to mention here is your absorption is very minimal from this little spray I'm giving myself here. And I'm stuck now. There's something I wanted to mention. Anyways, indirectly acting ones. So these are the ones that we take as tablets. So phenylephrine, phenylpropanolamine. I think that's in Benylin for flu. Pseudoephedrine and ephedrine. All of these we take for colds and flus as well. And all of these basically just cause more adrenaline to be more noradrenaline to be released locally at that area. So more adrenaline is released, more noradrenaline, the more alpha 1 is stimulated. The more alpha 1 is stimulated, the less plasma leakage will happen. So automatically, what would be a side effect if you have more alpha 1 stimulation? Blood pressure would go up. Because you know that this is now acting everywhere. So this is a systemic effect that you are causing with these drugs. And you are causing all the adrenergic system's side effects or effects by giving these free drugs. So you can actually predict a lot of their side effects. Think about the blood pressure can go up. What about heart? Do you think if the more neurotransmitter, if more noradrenaline is released at the heart itself, do you think your heart will beat faster or slower? Probably faster. So tachycardia is probably also a nice example. Blood pressure going up is probably also an example. Think about your eyes. Would your eyes constrict or would they dilate? Most likely they would dilate. So all of those side effects you can predict because you know where this drug will act. This drug will release more noradrenaline everywhere. There's no selectiveness to it. This one is very selective because you're spraying directly into your nose. But it's actually not selective, it will do it everywhere. But because it's directly into your nose, you don't get so much distribution happening, you don't get so much side effects. Hypertension. Oh, no, it can't be at that section yet. Oh, yeah, it is that section. That's pretty interesting. I actually forgot about the dual mechanism. Let's see if we can finish up until... I think we'll be able to. How much time do I have left? No, there's a lot of time, don't worry. Okay. Next section I want to go into is... What's the next section? Okay, this is mostly these effects of nasal congestion and colds, mostly alpha 1 agonists give you these effects. But we also have methyl dopa, which has a dual mechanism. So methyl dopa is one of the drugs we use in hypertension for pregnant ladies a lot. Very safe for pregnant ladies to use, that's why we use it so much. So it has a dual mechanism. It acts on the alpha 2 receptor presynaptically. And you remember what we said? We said if we act on the alpha 2 receptor presynaptically, we get less release of noradrenaline. If we get less release of noradrenaline, we get less binding to the alpha 1 here. So then we get a decrease in the blood pressure. So it's the indirect acting sympathomimetic drug. Methyl dopa, that is. And the other side of the mechanism is that it actually disturbs the production of noradrenaline because it acts as a precursor, but it's like a fake precursor. So when your body creates that neurotransmitter, it's a false neurotransmitter. It cannot actually give you full effect. It's ingenious. Anyways, I hope that makes sense. So we use methyl dopa a lot. It's acting against the effects of the adrenergic system. So even though this is a sympathomimetic, it's mimicking the effects of alpha 2, it's actually a sympatholytic because it's doing the opposite thing. A little bit complicated. What I want you to know is its mechanisms. If you understand the mechanisms, it's an alpha 2 receptor agonist, and it's also a false neurotransmitter. No, that's the wrong word. What's the right word? A false precursor. I can't remember the right word. We'll see if I can remember the right word as we're going along. Another use for adrenergic agonists is hypertension and shock. Of course, if your blood pressure is dropping dangerously low, you want to increase the blood pressure fast, and then you use something like phenylephrine or dobutamine or adrenaline or dopamine even, etc. And those act on the alpha 1 receptors and the beta 1 receptors. Not in that order. Different ones are to act on different receptors. But we'll go into that. Clonidine is used for prophylactic treatment of, what do you call it? Migraines. So that is normally to do with desensitizing the blood vessels for vasodilation. Migraines are normally caused by, not normally, there's a few theories around this, but migraines are generally called, let's say so many theories. Migraines are caused by a sudden change in blood pressure, not blood pressure, but sudden change in cranial pressure. When you get that sudden change in pressure, you can get a migraine happening. So if we give a person clonidine for extended periods of time, we can actually desensitize them against that sudden change in arterial dilation or constriction. And if a person doesn't react with that sudden change, the chance of getting a migraine decreases a lot. So we give it as a prophylaxis. Examination of the eyes, which I kind of mentioned already. Adverse effects should all be obvious. If you agonize alpha 1, if you activate it, you get hypertension, blood pressure going up. If your blood pressure goes very high, dangerously high, you can get a hemorrhage. A hemorrhage is a stroke. If you have a hemorrhage, you can get a piece of your artery bursting in your head. Especially in older people, blah, blah, blah. If you use xylometazoline for more than 5 days, your body starts making less alpha 1 receptors. Remember what we spoke about: downregulation, desensitization, loss of effect. Once again, principles coming back. Then you actually don't have any alpha 1 receptors in your nose, and you end up getting a rebound vacillation causing congestion. Of course, tachyphylaxis. So drugs like pseudoephedrine and ephedrine and phenylpropanolamine, those ones releasing noradrenaline the whole time to give effect, they eventually can cause that nerve terminal to become depleted of that neurotransmitter, and then you get tachyphylaxis, exhaustion of those stores completely. I don't want to go into this really. Okay, that's enough for one day. Otherwise, we won't even have enough work for next week. So, this is a very serious week with a lot of difficult work to cover. Do your best. Please do your best.